Hi, it's Kai. Today we are going to be doing a roundup of the books that I have finished since the beginning of the year. So basically for the first quarter of the year, I finished 4 books so far, which is technically off pace for what I wanted. I wanted to read 2 books a month, or essentially 25 books by the end of the year, which averages out to about 2 books a month. So I'm a little bit behind, but I've also read some pretty dense things for the beginning of the year. So I definitely think maybe some of the other things that I am reading will help me catch up to that if they're a little bit lighter. But anyway, I wanted to do a roundup version of this because if I'm being completely honest, the last book review that I did got 2 views, and I was like, well, I don't want to go through making a 40-minute video for 2 views, or if it's not interesting. So I figured maybe talking about multiple books and axing the kind of me going through some of what I tabbed. If you would like to hear that, I can definitely still do those types of videos, but I'm just trying to, make this in a way that is the most engaging for the most amount of people. But anyway, let's just stop the chatter and get into these books. The first one that I read this year, it started off with some fiction, and I've actually had this book for a really long time. One of my goals, in addition to reading 25 books by the end of the year, is to finish reading all of the books I currently have on my bookcase before buying anything new, with the exception of authors that I really enjoy, or like a book that gets recommended to me from someone. My uncle has given me a few recommendations, so I'll probably end up buying those at some point. But in general, I want to finish the books, or at least read through some of the books that I know I haven't finished. And my twin sister actually bought this for me when we were in undergrad. I want to say it was the Christmas after, or like of our first year in college, of our freshman year, so 2015 or 2016, somewhere around there. Either way, I've had it for a really long time and just never read it. It is Death Comes to Pemberley by P.D. James, and it is basically a spin-off of Pride and Prejudice from Jane Austen, which is one of my favorite classic books. When I was in high school, I went through a really big classics phase, and I really liked Pride and Prejudice. I felt like it was the, kind of enemies to lovers of all enemies to lovers. And it's probably why I don't love enemies to lovers, because I'm just like, who can do it as good as Jane Austen? Who can do the bickering and the, who do you think you are? You think very highly of yourself, unlike the literal classics. So again, this is a spin-off of that, but it is a murder mystery spin-off of it. So basically there is a party or a gala at the Pemberley estate, and everyone's preparing for that, and someone comes up dead on the property that Darcy and Elizabeth live on, which is Pemberley. I think that's what it's called. They have all of like the house names and then the family names. That is one thing I will say about some of the classics and books that are based off the classics. And that was one of the biggest critiques I had of this book, is that the first chapter read like the genealogical chapters of the Bible. So we're getting introduced to a lot of characters very quickly, and I feel as though if I had just read Pride and Prejudice, it would have been a little bit easier to pick up on this. But because I read Pride and Prejudice, over 10 years ago now, this was a little bit more sticky to kind of sort out the family relationships and who is who, and then also introducing all of these new characters. So I will say that is an aspect of it that I didn't like. I felt like that made it a little bit more difficult to read, and things that are already in that old English style can be a little bit more difficult to read to start with. It also has the pretty standard murder mystery plot line. We have the murder, then there was like the investigation and trial and all of that. There's someone who is the obvious red herring, and then there are the like plot twist of who actually did it and everything. So it's a good book. It was a nice fun read. I wouldn't say it's necessarily an easy read or something to read if you don't really like murder mysteries, or you don't really like Pride and Prejudice. I'm actually not a big murder mystery fan myself, but this one was fine. I didn't feel like it was too grotesque or something that made me feel paranoid in my apartment. So again, I don't usually do a lot of murder mystery thriller books like that, because I already have really bad anxiety. I don't need to make it worse by adding, you know, every author's imagined anxieties. The second book I've already talked about in multiple videos at this point, and it is, as I've said before, pretty much my favorite book of all time now because it is just so beautifully written, and it's written in a way that when you get to the end of it, oh, my books are just like falling off my lap, but when you get to the end of it, you genuinely are just floored, you're shocked, you are in despair. You are also just like, this is so beautifully well-rounded. Like, how could someone write a tragic book? This is a very tragic book. How could someone write that, but it still be so beautiful? I don't get it. Toni Morrison, she's dabbling in witchcraft and dark-sided stuff to be able to write like this. And this is the only thing that I've read from Toni Morrison thus far. And it's another thing where if I did not have my current rule of trying to finish the books that I already have on my shelf, I'd probably go out and buy a lot more Toni Morrison books and read through them. The premise of this book is kind of following along this little girl and the family and just kind of everything that goes into this little girl believing that she is ugly because she's Black, and that if she had blue eyes, which is what we pretty much equate to the pinnacle of whiteness and purity and perfection and all of that, you know, based on white supremacist standards. Basically, she believes that if she has blue eyes, her life will be better, everything will be better, she will get treated better, her parents will be nicer to each other. Like, she thinks that it'll be the salve for her unfortunate life, and it basically follows her saga to getting blue eyes while also, again, kind of going back in time to like her family, her mom, dad, their upbringing, things that happened to them that ends up manifesting in a child. So it is a book that largely hits on the ideas of white beauty standards, Black people, and especially Black women feeling like we are not beautiful for the features that we have naturally, that we need to have blonde hair and blue eyes and straight hair and all of these things to be beautiful, because that's the world that we've been conditioned. If you're at least here in the US, I can't say for all across the globe, but I know here in the US and a lot of the Western world, that's kind of the, you know, the Aryan idea of beauty is what prevails, even when those people are also somewhat ripping off of us, you know, people of color, because either way, all of that is to say it touches on that idea, the ideas of beauty and beauty standards, especially within the Black community. But I also feel like it definitely gives commentary on generational trauma and how your parents and their grandparents and what they did, all of that is what ends up, or you as a person are a product of all of that. You can't necessarily separate yourself from that. Very beautiful, beautifully written book, something that is definitely one that can be a little bit difficult to get through because it is so graphic, it's so vivid. It is something where you don't go into, or you don't come out of that book being the same person that went into it. And it's something that truly I believe every person, no matter their race, should read this book. I feel like there's a lot of people whose brains would be altered in a positive way if they did read something like this. Because that was so heavy, I ended up going to an astrology book because I like to learn astrology and tarot and those things on my off time or also as hobbies. So I went through The Complete Book of Astrology by Ada Aubin and June Rifkin. And while I think this is a good basic astrology book, I don't feel like it is as detailed as I would like it to be. There are some signs where I feel like they go more into that specific sign and the way that where it's placed in your chart could impact things. And then there's other ones where I feel like they wrote like 2 or 3 sentences on them and it just wasn't very descriptive or vivid. If you're like an introductory person to astrology and are just trying to get a basic meaning of the terms and the systems and the planets and all of that, this might be helpful. But as someone who has been learning and reading astrology books since I believe 2021 or 2020, but since I have been reading these books for so long, I felt like that one, it just fell a little bit short, and I feel like it didn't give me much new information that I couldn't find in one of the other astrology books I've already read. The last book that I've completed is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. I've also talked about this a little bit here on my page, and I really enjoyed this. Maya Angelou is a very gifted orator, as we know, but also a gifted writer. I just really enjoyed hearing about her upbringing. This is basically her memoir or autobiography from her younger years, or as early as she can have memories. I think she said 3 years old at the start, up to when she was 16 years old and gave birth to her son. And it's just, again, so interesting to see the very different lives that people lived. Maya Angelou was someone who lived in a segregated South. This is, Jim Crow laws before civil rights. And, she died after the civil rights movement. So she really got to see both sides of things. And then it also gives me a little bit of an appreciation for like my own grandparents, because my own grandparents were born very close to the Great Depression, and so they also grew up in segregated areas, or in a segregated United States, and then an unsegregated United States, and all of that. And it just, again, it makes you realize, especially when you see the dates and when you're like, wow, I lived at the same time as Maya Angelou, and these are some of the things that she experienced. This is the racism that her and her family experienced. This is what it was like living in a town where at any point the KKK could come in and say, hey, so a black boy did X, Y, and Z. So if we see any black boys tonight, you might want to keep, all of yours inside. If we see them, what happens. But it's just, especially with everything that is going on in the world currently, it's always interesting to see how history repeats itself, how it resolves itself, to see, how we really thought that we were this post-racial society, and we are very far from it. Maya Angelou also had a very, very full life. Like the fact that this, and I know it doesn't seem like the thickest book, but like it took me a second to get through it, and she just had like a lot go on in her life. So another one that I would highly recommend, and I recommend it in general, both of these books actually, because they're on banned book list. And if it's on a banned book list, it's probably a good book. It probably has knowledge that someone doesn't want you to know, because it will advance you in some sort of way. It will make you less susceptible to being manipulated, less susceptible to just believing certain things. So anyway, that's everything that I have read thus far for the first quarter of the year. I am currently reading Looking for Alaska, because that's another thing that I've had on my bookshelf since I was in high school, and I've started reading it, and every time I start it, and I am having the same issue, the book is actually like almost bent. It's been sitting on my desk so long, just like face down on the page that I stopped at, that it's bent like that. The spine of the book is disformed. So it's just, and that's the same thing that happened the first time I tried to read it. I just couldn't get past the first few pages. It wasn't grabbing me. And I have like some of John Green's books before, well, one of John Green's books. I really liked The Fault in Our Stars, but I feel like maybe the movie coming out at the time that it did also contributed to me wanting to read the book so that I could watch the movie. Anyway, I've been stuck on that one for a while. So if you've read that and you enjoyed it, please let me know. Tell me to go ahead and get through the book. Anyway, that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you are staying safe and healthy wherever you are when you're watching this, and I will talk to you guys in the next one.